IDSA, based in New Delhi, India. He holds a doctorate degree from the School of International Studies from Nehru University in New Delhi. Since joining IDSA in 2008, he has been researching on foreign policy, security, and strategic issues in West Asia, and India's relationship with West Asia and the wider Arab world. Dr. Pradhan is the author of many titles, including the monograph, India's Relationship with the Gulf Cooperation Council, Need to Look Beyond Business. He is also the editor of the book, Geopolitical Shifts in West Asia, Trends and Implications. Dr. Janardhan is a senior research fellow of the Asian program at the Anwar Gargash Academy, based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. He is a senior research fellow there. He has nearly 25 years of regional expertise, analyzing and unraveling the evolving multidimensional partnerships between countries of the Gulf and Asia. In addition to that, he offers diplomats MA course on Asian foreign policies. His broad-based interests also span politics, international relations, security, media, migration, and human trafficking. His academic publications include The Arab Gulf Pivot to Asia, From Transactional to Strategic Partnerships, New Gulf Security Architecture, Prospects and Challenges for an Asian Role, India and the Gulf, What's Next? Dr. Janardhan is also the managing assistant editor of the Journal of Arabian Studies. He received his PhD from the Nehru University based also in Delhi. Just to let our audience know, they should feel free to pose any questions through the chat, but we prefer through the Q&A chat box as well. And we will answer these questions towards the end of the program. We will begin with you, Dr. Pradhan. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I hope I'm able to share. Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen, Mahmood?
Yes, I can see the screen, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahmood. And thank you, Dirasat, for holding this Think Talk and inviting me to this Think Talk to speak on a topic which is very interesting for me, India and the GCC, India's relationship with the GCC. As you all know, we have India and GCC has a historical and civilizational relationship. In the ancient times, we'll know the interaction between India and the Gulf region focused on commercial, religious, cultural, and people-to-people contacts. And in the modern times, the good thing is that in the modern times, such connections have continued over centuries and decades, facing so many changes and challenges, both in India as well as in the Gulf. And today it is one of the most important regions for India in its foreign policy as well as security policy. So for India, it is our just extended neighborhood, which is connected by the Arabian Sea, which our ancestors used to cross. And keeping in view the huge economic interests we have, India calls it economic hinterland, the Gulf region as India's economic hinterland. To focus more on the region, India has adopted a look west policy to engage more deeply with the countries of the region. And also it is complemented by the look east policy, which Mahmood was referring to in his introductory remarks of the Gulf Arab states. So there is a convergence of interest here, look west policy of India as well as look east policy of the GCC countries. India's Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar says that we must think west. We must focus our thinking on West Asia, meaning West Asia, which was echoed by our Foreign Secretary, who says it is the outreach to the Gulf and Western countries has become an important pillar of our foreign policy. On the top of it is neighborhood policy of Prime Minister Modi, which is engaging with the neighborhood in a more coordinated and more deepened way. Here are the key, I would say, elements of India's relationship with the GCC. One is trade, second is energy security, third is defense and security cooperation, which is emerging as a potential cooperation between India and GCC. Then building up strategic partnership in the long term, and also safety of Indian nationals in the Gulf. If you look at these figures, this shows the bilateral trade between India and GCC, which stands at present around $120 billion. This is almost 15% of India's total global trade. I would like to draw your attention towards particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE. UAE, that is $59 billion, and Saudi Arabia is more than $33 billion. So there are two key important trading partners for India, at least from this region. Coming to energy imports, which is again very important aspect so far as India is concerned. India hugely rely on Gulf imports from the Gulf region. As you can see from this table, it is Iraq and Saudi Arabia, the top two. Other GCC countries are like UAE, Kuwait, and Oman, which are also key suppliers of oil for India. India is trying a bit to diversify its oil sources as well. So it is looking up to some African countries as well as the Caribbean countries. But on any Gulf region is being the immediate neighborhood, it is always desirable for India to buy more oil from the Gulf region than any other. So far as natural gas is concerned, I should also make a mention of Qatar, which supplies around half of India's natural gas demands. And keeping in view that India's huge population as well as growing economy, so India's energy demands continue to grow. It is expected that it will continue to grow at a rate of 4.2% through the year 2035. And it is also estimated that in a decade or so, India may be the top oil consumer in the world. At present, it is the third largest oil consuming country after US and China. So that way, the GCC countries play an important role for India's energy security. Third aspect which I would like to highlight here is the defense and security cooperation. There are a lot of, I would say, there are a lot of potential in this field, which are yet to be fulfilled or achieved by both India as well as GCC countries. India has signed defense cooperation agreements with a number of GCC countries. At present, the defense cooperation is limited to holding joint exercises and training. A lot of GCC military personnel getting training in India. There are joint exercises by Indian Navy with Gulf counterparts, air forces, armies also, and the coast guards also. So there are a lot of training and sharing of expertise between these military wings. But so far as defense cooperation, the research and development is concerned, defense export, manufacturing is concerned, I think we are lacking there. But there is, I would argue, there is a huge potential between India and the GCC countries to further strengthen and deepen their engagements in defense cooperation. Obviously, that would require a huge lot of money as well as human resources and expertise, but then that is the challenge. So far as security cooperation is concerned, there have been some number of success stories where we have seen some terrorists, criminals who were hiding in the Gulf, were wanted back in India, they have been deported. So some sort of cooperation is already taking place between India and the GCC. Cooperation against terror is key on the agenda of India as well as the GCC countries, I believe. As the terrorist groups we know have established interstate networks, so no single country can actually defeat them. So you need to join hands together, all the countries who are affected, to defeat the menace of terrorism. That's why it is India has always been arguing that we should join hands together, all the countries who have been affected by the menace of terrorism, and particularly in the areas of exchange of information, intelligence, and terror financing, which is key to to defeat any terrorist group. In the aftermath of the Arab unrest, ISIS emerged in a big way with a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. That became a big concern for India as well. There have been instances of few Indians joining the ISIS in Iraq, Syria, and also in Afghanistan. Growing radicalization or any possibility of ISIS trapping more Indian youths to its fold was another concern for India as well. Indian security forces and agencies have busted several ISIS networks in several parts of the country. In recent years, something which is growing as a concern is the growing network of ISIS in India's neighborhood. We all know that Afghanistan and Pakistan provide such conducive atmosphere for the growth of radical ideology. ISIS also looking at countries like Bangladesh, countries like Sri Lanka and Maldives in India's neighborhood to further strengthen their network and further entrench themselves. Another issue I would like to highlight is the safety of the sea lanes of cooperation and India's cooperation with the GCC countries. If I can give you some facts here, around 90% of India's trade by value and 70% by volume is done through the maritime routes. So it is obvious that it is maintaining the safety of the sea lines of communication is important, extremely important for India. It has we have also witnessed that in the past some Indian ships have been hijacked and huge ransoms have been made. Same also is the case with the GCC countries. The GCC countries are also mainly oil exporting countries. So for them also, the sea lanes of communication, maintaining the sea lanes of communication is extremely important. These GCC countries are also international trading hubs. So anything coming to Gulf or going out of the Gulf should be secure in the sea as well. Since 2008, when Indian ships were hijacked and the ransoms made, India has been consistently deploying a naval ship in the Gulf of Aden, which is providing security to the ships flowing in that region. For us, maintaining the safety of the choke points is important, as you can see in this map. Important is the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el Mandab. This is for India. It is crucial in these choke points, especially in the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. In its maritime doctrine of 2009, India says that the choke points are one of the primary areas of maritime interest. Coming to expatriates and remittances, as I said, there are 9 million Indians living and working in the region. So they form a very historical and natural link between India as well as the GCC countries. But during the Arab unrest, there was a bit of concern in India about safety and security of its nationals. India evacuated a large number of its nationals from countries like Libya, Egypt, as well as Yemen later in 2015. So India is concerned about any events taking place in GCC countries, but thankfully situation in GCC countries have remained stable. From the expatriates, India is the highest recipient of remittances in the world. This is around $80 billion. And 52%, more than 50%, half of it comes from the West Asian region. And again, from West Asia, most of this money comes from countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, where most of our Indian nationals are concentrated. Building strategic partnership, as your subtitle says, is another key interest of India. India is looking forward to move beyond the buyer-seller relationship, move beyond trade and business, and building comprehensive strategic partnership, which will be sustainable and long-term. It is good that there is an India-GCC political dialogue which is institutionalized, and it is usually held every year in the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly meeting. And as a result of continuous engagements, we are now looking at multiple fronts of engagement. So moving beyond the traditional diaspora energy or trade relationship, we are now moving into other spheres, which are which are not discovered, or even if it was discovered, it was not that deeply engaged, like defense cooperation, and security cooperation. I'll end with this, saying that even during the pandemic, the cooperation between India and the GCC countries has continued. India initially extended support to the countries of the GCC countries by sending medicines and medical equipment. At the request of the governments of Kuwait and UAE, India has sent medical teams to uh, help the experts there to fight the pandemic. Presently, India is also supplying COVID-19 vaccines, the Covishield vaccines that is made in India. To some of it has already supplied to some of the GCC states. Maybe some other states will be receiving soon. So this is something India has stood up with the GCC states, friends, at a time of pandemic. So by quickly providing the aid and expertise, India is reinforcing its image of a reliable friend, of a strong friend who is always willing to engage with. I'll stop here, Mahmood, and I have just flagged the key points, and I'll look forward to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pradhan, for that insightful and comprehensive outlook of India-GCC relations. Now we'll pass the torch to Dr. Janardhan, who's reporting in from Abu Dhabi. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mahmood. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Darasat, for organizing this Think Talk and inviting me. And I think Prashant, my university mate, has made the opening remarks and has laid the foundation for a broader perspective. I mean, I think he spoke specifically about GCC-India relations. I want to give a macro perspective on what's happening in terms of GCC-India relations. I think it's important first to link the global developments, the changes that have taken place around the world in both, and link that to what's happening, the changes in the GCC countries and India, and how they have impacted the GCC-India relations. First, I think we must see GCC-India ties from the context of how GCC-Asia relations have developed over the last 2 decades. I think that's very important. Yes, India and the GCC countries have had a historical relationship, but I think the dynamics completely changed over the last 2 years, partly because of the Asian economic boom. I think the number of investment opportunities, the need for investment in infrastructure projects in the Asian countries, the complementarity, the funds-rich region, the wealth-rich GCC region, and the wealth-poor Asian countries actually benefited from that complementarity. There was also a factor in terms of how the GCC countries felt that they got much better returns in investing in the Asian countries, simply because they thought that there was more bang for their buck. Things that could be produced in the West for $100 could be produced for $10 to $15 in the East. So all that helped GCC-Asia relations grow. And this coincided with the slowdown in the Western economies itself. And of course, the financial crisis came in, which exposed the chinks in the Western financial systems. Then we must also realize that the impact of 9/11 actually benefited GCC-Asia relations. There was a perceptible Western suspicion about investments from this part of the world post 9/11, whereas Asia didn't bother much. I mean, there was no baggage attached to the GCC-Asia relations. There was also no link between economic engagement and political reform. The West always tied the economic engagement to the political reform. If I need to highlight 2 areas, I think both the United States and the European Union, the FTA talks with the GCC countries actually failed on these issues. So there was no political baggage here as well. Then there was also a sense of fatigue factor. There was a fatigue about the United States in the region and a fatigue about the region in the United States, owing to a lot of things, which again shifted the focus towards Asia. Then there was the cultural comfort factor. 70% of all expatriates in the GCC countries are Asian. So obviously all this encouraged what has been designated as East-East camaraderie, a look East policy that we have referred to from this part of the world, and a reciprocal think West policy from India and from many other Asian countries. What happened in the region is also equally important. There has been a perceptible change in the GCC foreign policy itself and the image of the GCC countries as well. There has been, to me, I think the biggest factor has been shunning of religious ideology. It didn't matter what the religion of a particular country was, what its political ideology was, what its foreign policy orientation was. The only thing that mattered to the region was whether it made economic sense or not. So in that context, I think economic sense became common sense to the GCC countries. The GCC countries' foreign policy has also become very proactive. It used to be reactive in the past. It has become proactive. It's become dynamic. It's no longer just about humanitarian aid. It's gotten very diplomatically active. It's become muscular also in a sense. The other thing is we often hear the GCC countries going through economic diversification. I think we must note that along with economic diversification and promotion of knowledge economy, there's also been foreign policy diversification. It's looked beyond the West. We now see that the GCC countries are engaging with many Asian players, African countries, South America, and it is friends with countries that are rivals. I think that's a very important thing to note. It is friends with United States and Russia, with China and India, India and Pakistan, Israel and the Palestinian territories in a sense. So if you look at this sort of foreign policy of the GCC countries, it mirrors Indian foreign policy, because Indian foreign policy has also been equidistant with several countries in the region. And then we have also seen the GCC countries move away from seeking mediation to becoming mediators. Then we've seen them from voting for others to host events and important headquarters to actually seeking votes to host institutions like IRENA or Expo 2020 and even the FIFA World Cup 2022. And I think the bigger change has been that from being a security recipient, the GCC countries are now becoming security providers. Right, so we've got bases of the GCC countries in the Horn of Africa, and there's been an attempt at trying to evolve regional solutions for regional problems. So when you put all this into context, the image of the GCC countries has changed too. And I often refer to it as moving from IBM to Maggi. Now, IBM, I'm sure all of you are aware of as a software company, but long before IBM became famous, I believe the GCC countries were very well known as the IBM countries. And this was narrated to me by a former Indian diplomat. And he told me that whenever you took a business deal to any of the GCC countries' offices, they would invariably tell you that, inshallah, come back tomorrow, bukra. And then when you go the next day, it would invariably be malish, sorry. So IBM basically refers, is an acronym for Inshallah, Bukra, Malish. That was the sort of culture that existed in the GCC countries, 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago. But there has been a complete change in terms of how the business is conducted now in the region, as a result of which formerly famous IBM culture has now become the Maggi culture, where everything gets done in 2 minutes. So similarly, changes in India too. Between 1991 and 2019, India's economy grew tenfold, from about $300 million to nearly $3 trillion. And now it seems a little far-fetched, but according to a 2017 PricewaterhouseCoopers report, there India could well be the world's second largest economy by 2050. Now, that again, like I said, seems a bit far-fetched, especially with the US in the third place. But in any case, India among the top 3 countries is inevitable. And I think this could happen even over the next decade. And you heard Prashant reeling out figures there in terms of how India could well become the #1 oil consumer, growing at about 5%, oil consumption every year, which definitely indicates that India's economy is going to move along despite a lot of skepticism in terms of how it will eventually manage to do so. The new approach in India has also been to hyperlink economic and foreign policies to boost economic growth. And I think they're now beginning to even link it to security issues, which complements what's happening in the GCC region as well. And like I already mentioned when I was talking about the GCC foreign policies, India's also got a very sophisticated foreign policy. It's got all sides covered. It's pursuing a robust neighborhood policy in South Asia. It's got the Act East policy. It's got the Connect Central Asia policy. And now it's got a Think West policy, for the Middle East or West Asia as it's designated in India. So what it means is that India is, yes, a super poor country at one level, but it's also an aspiring superpower. And it's attempting to adopt a security-oriented foreign policy. It's modernizing its armed forces, especially the Navy. It's ironical, yes, many people often question how a land of non-violent Gandhi is also a nuclear power and one of the biggest arms buyers in the world. But that's the way it is. Welcome to the land of contradictions. But while it is an aspiring superpower, I think India also knows its limitations. It's unlikely to prioritize its security role over domestic economic and social commitments. I think that's a very important thing to take note of. It will be a disruptor in many senses of the term, but it will be a positive one. It will push for a multipolar world. I think when you put all this together, this is how it will have a positive impact on GCC India ties. There's no doubt, as Prashant has already showcased, that the ties have grown, the ties have matured, they've gone up several notches, it's become diversified, it's no longer just about a few sectors, it's comprehensive, yes. But I think to frame this growing GCC India relations in WhatsApp language, which we are all very, very familiar with now, is that it's moved from P to P to B to B to G to G. What do I mean by that? P to P means from people to people to B to B, which is business to business, and then moved on to G to G, which is government to government. I think we have seen that. And again, Prashant talked about how the relationship is getting institutionalized. There is the Strategic Partnership Council at the level of the top leadership. There's also the elevation of all bilateral partnerships to strategic level with high-level ministerial groups driving the relationship, which shows the importance attached to the GCC-India relationship largely. And ironically, it's the right-wing government in India that has had its best foreign policy success in the Muslim world, because we've seen a lot of debate in terms of the domestic controversies that are taking place, but that has not in any way stopped the government in India to proceed with its relations with the Muslim world, which actually shows the disconnect between the domestic and foreign policies in India, unlike the United States, where America First is actually a reflection of the connect between the domestic and the foreign policies. So the growth in the government-to-government ties between India and the GCC countries has helped relations move beyond oil trade and expatriates. It has assumed strategic proportions. And it's also important that India is gluing together the commercial, political, diplomatic, and security dynamics. And what this means, again, I mean, forgive my example, but an entertaining example, so to say, but it's what Spider-Man says, right? I mean, those of you who are familiar with Spider-Man, he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And India is actually advertising itself as a net security provider now. all this has also obviously impacted GCC India trade. It's evolved. Prashant gave you figures, bilateral figures. Let me just give you a collective figure. I mean, it was merely $7 billion in 2000. GCC India trade was just about $7 billion in 2000. It's now $120 billion. And that was the 2018 figure. I don't think there's much of a change now, but that's an increase of 17 times. In comparison, during the same period, China GCC trade increased 12 times, which is great. Japan GCC trade rose less than twice. South Korea's 4 times. EU GCC trade increased by 2.5 times. And GCC's trade with United States has only tripled. So look at India's growth and India GCC trade growth. It grew 17-fold. And that speaks volumes, right? So what has changed in this relationship is that it's no longer a one-way street. It's not just about the GCC countries providing energy security to India. It is India now which is providing food security. I mean, we've heard of the food for oil program or oil for food program in the past with Iraq, but now I think the GCC India relationship is about food security for energy security, if you can call that. Then it's not about the GCC countries hosting Indian expatriates and facilitating their remittances anymore. It's also about Indians contributing to, through cross-investment. There is cross-investment now. Indian government is investing in GCC energy projects, and Indians are among the biggest investors in the GCC's real estate sector. And strategic cooperation includes 21st century diplomacy now. You have space cooperation, agreements related to artificial intelligence and blockchain as part of the effort to tap into developments of the fourth industrial revolution. And we are also beginning to see expansion of bilateral ties to what I refer to as plurilateral engagement, which has seen India tie up with the GCC countries to promote development projects in Africa. But the game changer, again, as Prashant already mentioned, is the new intent in the security and defense domains. Security partnerships, strategic partnerships are the in thing now. It includes collaboration in fighting extremism, terrorism, setting up naval bases, conducting joint naval exercises. And it's really pertinent to point out that the first ever visit to the region by an Indian Army chief took place only a few months ago. So India's security imprint in the region is also important because at some point, India and the other Asian powers, which are the principal buyers of oil from the region, have to stop riding piggyback on US naval presence in the region. With the US's pivot to Asia and confusing signals about its regional involvement, there seems to be a search among the GCC countries, at least in some quarters, for a plan B, and even among the Asian side. So the GCC countries and Asian countries, including India, are now beginning to think of having to contribute in some sense to the security architecture of the region, to protect their supply chain routes. And if you see all these comprehensive strategic partnerships that are taking place, they all are in some sense a new confidence building process. And this takes me back to the point about UAE's economic, foreign policy, and security diversification efforts, which can be referred to as an omni-balancing approach, a multi-vector approach, or even a hedging strategy. The important thing to note also is that the new GCC-India ties are no longer ad hoc. I already mentioned this. Bilateral dialogue has been institutionalized. There are joint statements now after every high-level meetings. And consistently over the last 5 or 6 years, all of them have been purposeful. The joint statements have been purposeful. The comprehensive strategic partnership is obviously part of this mix. There is now a comprehensive security dialogue that has been initiated at the level of the national security advisors in some countries. And so there is a realization, I think, even on the GCC side, that India is not just anymore a local player or a global player. It is actually a combination of the two, which is glocal. global player, which means that India is prominent globally, but is still has a local and regional impact. A trait that you can actually now begin to identify even with the GCC countries, because they too are becoming global players in a sense. Now, let me close, with the last two comments that I want to make, and that is, I must give credit, even as an Indian, that the GCC countries have been the first ones to push the Look East policy. I think for far too long, the GCC-India relations were taken for granted on both sides. But I think it was the GCC countries which realized at the beginning of this century that they need to look east, they need to look towards India. And I think for the first decade of this century, India was actually busy narrowing the gap with the Western world. But now I think they have also realized and begun to, treat the region in kind. There's been a lot more reciprocal, attempt at trying to reach out to the GCC countries. And the former Indian vice president, he used to also be a diplomat in the region, but the former Indian vice president, Hamid Ansari, actually said the Gulf has always been Indian friendly. Now it is also India friendly. The Gulf has never been so Indian, he said. And I think it's this realization that has made India also reciprocate in kind. And it is doing so, I think, very important to underline this. It is doing so by adopting a very different policy approach compared to any other influential power. And that is, its policy towards the region is centered around 4 key parameters: non-prescriptive, non-intrusive, non-judgmental, and neutral in intra-regional disputes. I leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Janardhan, for that insightful and very comprehensive look at GCC-India relations. Speaking as a Bahraini, we have a lot of cultural links with India, even within our own dialect as well. We have adopted a lot of sayings and words from Indian as well. So you see, there's this cultural melting pot within Bahrain and India along this decades old now, if not hundreds of years old. So now we would like to begin the sort of the conversation section of this Think Talk. So Dr. Pradhan, if I may ask you, what do you find are the historical foundations of Indian-Arabian Gulf relations? And how were formal relations established between these two parts of the world? The floor is yours.
Yes, as I said in the beginning, in the ancient times, it was more focused on commercial, religious, cultural aspects of the relationship. Then there are a lot of sort of movement of people from India to the Gulf region, especially to Oman and Yemeni coasts. And also there are a lot of people moving from there back to India as well. And importantly, there didn't have, at that point of time, didn't have that much of science and technology. They're using boats and using seasonal winds. So using boats and seasonal winds, people-to-people contact, that was extraordinary. And the thing is that didn't end there. That has continued for decades and centuries. And if you look today, it has gone through faced many challenges, gone through many changes. And in the aftermath of India's independence, and also as the Gulf countries became independent and sovereign, our relationship has found new contours. There is a time when there is a lot of movement of Indians to the Gulf region in 70s in the aftermath of the oil boom, and today you see there are a lot of people not just in the oil sector but also in technical medical sectors as well who are contributing to the developments in the Gulf as well. So I would say that from history to today, the relationship has taken huge leaps, and it is reflected in relationship today.
Thank you very much for that. A lot of this coincides with the discovery of oil, but like as you correctly pointed out, these relations are a lot more historical in their nature and ancient as well. Dr. Jadran, what do you feel are some of the important developments from the GCC's Look East policy and India's Look West policy, and how does India perceive this foreign policy initiative based in a multilateral world that we are witnessing today?
Yeah, I think for one, of course, a lot of the relationship was rooted in oil trade and expatriates, no doubt. But the changes that have taken place in the world meant that they also needed to link it with the security dynamics, and that's what happened. But it's also often misunderstood that when we refer to strategic partnership between the GCC countries and India, we are actually talking only about the security dynamic. No, I think we are now beginning to see a strategic component involved in almost every, multi-sectoral engagement. In every sector, there is strategic engagement. I refer to food security for energy security, for example. India and the GCC countries, in some sense, especially with the UAE, there is the Farm to Port project, and this is basically in terms of how the UAE is trying to invest in the agricultural sector in India. You know very well that India doesn't allow for purchase of land like many other countries are allowing the GCC countries. But in India, investment is allowed in the agriculture sector, and the UAE and the GCC countries are trying to ensure food security by encouraging growth of crops which are specific to this part of the world, and then linking it to logistical support, which means building of roads, perhaps rail networks, building cold storage facilities, and some of the ports are already operated by DP World. As a result of which, you now have the complete connectivity between the farm and the port. I think that's very strategic. So it's not a one-sided affair. Like I said already, it's a cross investment that's taking place. We could possibly see engagement in the defense sector moving ahead in terms of manufacturing spare parts for fighter jets that are being procured by both the GCC countries and India. We are beginning to see special focus on common problems, tackling radicalism, countering extremism. I think some of these issues which were always being brushed under the carpet in the past are now openly being discussed. Measures are being taken to try and navigate those through difficult processes. I think the effort at trying to overcome the excess baggage of even Pakistan, for example, in the India-GCC relationship has been very important. Since 2000, I think the GCC countries have been more friendly towards India. Kashmir is now being treated as if it's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, and no longer an issue that requires international mediation, which really went down very well with India. And that's why I said the GCC countries have moved beyond religious ideology in a sense. And this has certainly improved GCC-India relationship in the last decade or so. And we're beginning to see movement in terms of military attaches now being posted in the region. And as I mentioned already, bases being opened. And I'm sure we'll talk a little more about this moving ahead. Israel also now becomes a factor, right? I mean, Israel was a no-go area for this part of the world, but now with the GCC countries normalizing ties, with some of them normalizing ties with Israel, that opens up a completely different set of opportunities for India, GCC countries, and Israel to cooperate in the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Janardharan. Traditionally, strategic, or the word strategy, had a very military inclination, if you will, but now we see in this complicated world that we are living in now, it's encompassing far more different sectors, as you mentioned, like food security and different sectors that are vital for any nation to properly run. Dr. Pradhan, Just to sort of piggyback from the last question, do you see any new areas or avenues of cooperation between the GCC and India in your perspective?
As I mentioned, something which is, I would say, defense cooperation, which has a lot of potential, I believe, but which is not yet fully explored. Defense cooperation is limited to joint exercises, training, and all. But I think India and GCC countries together can explore things like R&D, research and development, maybe joint production, maybe set up a joint farm, military farm, which is something which obviously it will be capital intensive. It will require human resources. It will require political will, strong political will from both the sides. But I think it will be worth it if both India and some of the GCC countries can join hands together. That's one. And I think living in a time of the pandemic, I think cooperation in the field of health sector especially is also looks very promising and pertinent, especially be it production or joint production of vaccines, further investment in research and development, joint funding some kind of research institutes, investing in science and technology so far as health sector is concerned. I think India and GCC countries can explore more in that. So far as I would say the energy sector is concerned, we have a strong and robust energy partnership. That is fine. But still, a lot more can be done in that sector also, especially in the field of investment. Investment is something, another field which is actually not tapped up to its potential, I would believe. Especially the Gulf economies have a lot of sovereign wealth fund. They can be invested here in India. Some Indian companies are also willing to have the capability also to invest back there in Gulf as well. So investment sector is another sector which has a lot of potential, but which has not been tapped yet, I would say.
Thank you very much for that. And just going off the statements from both of you gentlemen, we can see that there's a lot of political will from both sides to develop relations in order to meet modern challenges that's facing the world today. We have around 10 minutes left remaining. So I think with that, we'd like to open the floor for the questions. So if you have any more questions, feel free to post them. But we have one general question, specifically, how has COVID-19 affected Indian-Arab Gulf relations? I know that we sort of hinted on this before, but Dr. Janardhan, do you have any remarks regarding this pandemic and how it's affected relations?
I mean, I think it's a bit too far-fetched to say that it has had either a positive impact or a negative impact. I mean, things move on as usual because at the end of the day, any crisis is an opportunity. And if the pandemic has been a crisis, then obviously it served as an opportunity for the GCC countries and India to taper over differences, because obviously there were a whole lot of issues that came up in terms of how to deal with expatriates, how to deal with the flight bans that came into place, how to deal with supplies of medicines, medical manpower, vaccines now, and a host of other issues. And I haven't really noted anything incongruent in a sense, anything amiss over the last year or so. So I think to a large extent, the camaraderie that existed earlier has continued during the period of crisis. And whatever little differences did exist, at least at the policy level, seems to have been tapered over, and we can only continue to grow from here.
Thank you for that. Dr. Parran, would you like to add anything about how COVID-19 has affected India-GCC relations, more so than you have already included, sir?
I would more or less, I agree with what Janardhan said. I mean, it is what it looked like that in 1 year, there are not any high-level interactions, or I would say high-level visits exchanged between India and the GCC countries. And it's obvious because of the pandemic. But even as the situation uh, became better, a little better, we have seen India's foreign minister traveling there, and Indian Army chief also visiting the Gulf region. So I would not say that there was anything that pandemic actually hampered the relationship. It will look like that there has been not there have been no bilateral high level exchange of visits, but otherwise it was business as usual. Only thing I would like to add here is that there is a bit of concern in back here in India that the people who are coming back from the Gulf, some of them may be losing their was how to accommodate them in local economy here, but that is only for the purpose of giving them employment and accommodating them in economy, and that I would say did not affect India's relationship with GCC countries as such. So that was more or less accommodating them in Indian economy.
Absolutely. And actually, Prime Minister Modi visited Bahrain, I believe, in 2019. It was the first visit of any Indian Prime Minister to the Kingdom of Bahrain. So it was a very historical moment. And as many of you know, that Bahrain has really wanted to champion itself as a country of religious tolerance and peaceful coexistence. So it was very much help complement different goals between both Bahrain and India at the same time. We have another question, a very interesting question, actually. This was posed anonymously. To what extent does the Biden administration will affect the relationship between India and the GCC? Specifically, when we talk about advanced relationship between the US and India towards the end of the previous Trump administration. Dr. Janardhan, what are your thoughts about this, about President Biden's new administration, and how will that impact GCC-India relations?
I don't think the GCC-India relationship is in any way linked to any other foreign country's foreign policy. Like I already mentioned, India has, as always, had its own foreign policy, has not ever tried to link its relations with one particular country in dealing with a certain other country. So it's always been marginal. I don't think there's ever been an attempt by India to influence US's relations with the GCC countries, nor there has been, I think, any serious endeavor on the part of Washington to influence India's policy on the GCC countries. Neither are the GCC countries today weak enough to fall into the trap of trying to play one against the other. So I really think it's divorced from India. India GCC relations are divorced from India US relations. It would neither benefit nor adversely impact relations. I think the growth trajectory is something that we can always look forward to, irrespective of which administration takes over wherever else in the world.
Thank you for that, sir. And Dr. Pradhan, would you like to add anything in terms of how?
Correct. I think I would agree also with Janardhan. I mean, India GCC relationship independent of any influence, outside influence, be it US or any other country for that matter. So, be it Biden administration or Trump administration, our relationship, India GCC relationship has continued, irrespective of the political party or the president in power in Washington DC. So I don't think Biden coming to power will in any way hamper or negatively affect India GCC relationship.
Thank you for that, sir. We have, we seem to have one more question left. Do you, Dr. Janardhan, do you see any potential avenues of cooperation between India and Bahrain specifically? Do you think, I know Bahrain's a small country, might not have the biggest geopolitical footprint, but I think that doesn't negate any opportunities that could be involved for developing bilateral relations.
No, absolutely. I think, size of the country really doesn't matter in this time and age. I think the global scenario is such that even a small country can have a big impact. You can always punch above your weight. And I don't think India would mind dealing with a small country like Bahrain as long as there is ample opportunities. I think in this time and age, we are all moving, especially during the pandemic, we've all realized what technology is all about, and we have immense opportunities in terms of tapping into the opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution. Artificial intelligence, blockchain are all these areas where both Bahrain and India can definitely cooperate. I think trying to actually look for opportunities beyond the bilateral is also something that Bahrain can consider, because I think there is only that much scope for any bilateral relationship to grow when you're looking at the narrow focus of bilateral relationship. Suppose you were to look at third party getting involved like that, and that's why I mentioned Israel. What if there is scope for Bahrain, India and Israel to work together on common areas of interest? Because if you already go into the Abraham Accord that Bahrain has signed with Israel, there are specific areas that you are going to target. You're going to look at technology. You're going to look at food security. You're going to look at a host of issues which actually are the same things that India and Israel are cooperating with. So is there a way that we can come together and work on it? Is there a way that UAE and Bahrain can work together in other countries, become part of the Freedom Corridor, for example? Can they cooperate in Africa? I think these are opportunities that one needs to tap into moving forward.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Parana, would you like to add anything about how?
Yes, if I may add, yes, the question is very pertinent, and I think there are several areas we can focus on. And such areas of cooperation has been discussed during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Bahrain and subsequent official meetings as well. Some of the issues which has been highlighted is potential cooperation. India's cooperation with Bahrain in the field of counter-terrorism and security, information sharing, intelligence sharing, etc. Bahrain, as you said, is a small country, but I would say that it's a small country, but it's a good old friend of India. So there is a lot of trust and confidence between India and Bahrain in the bilateral relationship. There has also been talks of cooperation between India and Bahrain in the field of human resource development. Training programs as well. Another area which was identified as a key area of cooperation was in the field of oil and natural gas. So there can be investment, there can be exchange of expertise, there can be use of exchange of technology as well between the two countries. So it's a small country, but I would again repeat, it's a good friend and old friend of India.
Absolutely, and especially given in this multilateral world that we're living in, as both of you pointed out succinctly, that there's a lot of room for punching above your weight, for countries to get involved in very multifaceted challenges that meets both on a domestic and regional level as well. Well, thank you to you both, gentlemen, for giving time today from your busy schedules for joining us today on today's Think Talk. I'd also like to thank the participants and attendees who have joined us today. Be sure to follow Darasat at DarasatBH on Instagram and Twitter, and we look forward to seeing you in future events. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you for all the participants.
Thank you.
And stay safe as well.
Thank you so much.